What's up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we're coming at you each and every week with a fresh weekend to debrief in an effort to send biblical truth. What better way to do that than by the power of conversation? I'm one of your hosts, Caleb Pearson. Joining me again in the host spotlight, Miss Rose Locke. Rose, how are you?
I'm good, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you for being here.
I'm happy that they're laying carpeting on the stage.
It's almost
I have
done.
been holding my breath for that for 2 months.
Everyone's been holding their breath for that. It's very exciting. Good stuff down there. Thank you for being here, Rose. You're awesome. He's back with us, the man, the myth, the Mark Carey. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Fine.
Good. Thank you for being here. Guys, let's jump into a Sunday in review. I feel like I want to soak up these last few sermon spotlights where we're covering Acts. You know what I mean? It's all coming to this, it's crescendoing a little bit, coming to a close, very exciting. Obviously covered a lot of material this weekend. So Rose, I'll come your way first and we'll bounce back and forth here.
Yeah.
But what stood out this weekend?
Well, there's a lot of material and a lot of stuff that stood out.
Yeah.
I have like two things that I'd love to talk about
Let's
today
do
if
it.
we can. And one, I was just saying, is chapter 26, verse 18. Because I think, the triumph of the gospel and what are the results of the gospel. And like what, if Paul could have persuaded these men to become believers, what is he persuading them to, and what are the benefits going to be? I feel like Paul, in one verse, Luke, I guess, wrote it, but in one verse there, he like gives us 4 key thoughts that are results of the gospel. That turning from darkness to light, from the dominion of Satan to God, receiving forgiveness of sins, and the inheritance among those who have been saved, the hope, that inheritance. And so I just feel like that verse really just has a ton of meat for us as believers and our walk, and what is it that we live and walk in. And then I really was struck in, Mark, I'll tell you the other thing that struck me as I was listening was verse 27, where Paul says...
Of 26?
I think it's 26. Yeah, it's 26. And where Paul says, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets, capital? And then you just mentioned as an aside that Agrippa was Jewish, right? And so this idea of do you really believe this faith, if you really believe this faith, then how can you continue to not deny that Jesus is the result of that faith? And just kind of a shout out to our children's ministry and the parents, because they've started this new curriculum, right, in our kids' ministry. And I have actually in my hand, because I brought it, because I wanted to just, there's a key question for every month that's being sent to the parents and to all the kids. And then there's an answer. And the key question for this month in our children's ministry is, how is Jesus the perfect prophet? And the answer that is continually being presented to our kids and to their parents through the emails are, Jesus perfectly reveals God the Father and fulfills what the prophet spoke. So even in the midst of us in your sermons studying this and this keyword prophets popping out, we have God showing us how he can pull everything together for us, even in his body, outside his plan. It's just an amazing thing to see God work in those ways. So those are just a couple of things that stood out to me from these passages.
To work backwards on those, I mean, you talk about how easy it is for, especially a church our size, to do so many different things. Oh, your ministry does your thing, we're going to do our thing. But there is a benefit to the same material being covered to a certain degree. How can we, widen that Venn diagram so much so that we're overlapping? And you think about that car ride home. I challenge my students, do not say good or fine, no matter how good or fine it was. Your mom's going to ask, how was small group? Good. It was fine.
Yeah, right.
Nope. That's lame. That's not a good answer. Come on, give her something specific. Think critically about what's happening. And so I look at right. It was fine. Right. Or I hated it. Whatever. But how can we equip our families with a oh, they're learning something that we're learning. And if it's at
Yeah.
deeper levels, now you open the eyes for parents of like, oh, cool, we could disciple them.
Right.
in
And
that.
how is Paul trying to disciple
Mm-hmm.
Agrippa and using the prophets as a proof? And here we are helping our kids see how Jesus is the perfect fulfillment of the prophets at the same time. You know, like praise and glory to God in his sovereign plan in the way he does that for us, right? Because there might be a 5th or 6th grader sitting out there
Oh, yeah.
this weekend who kind of heard that, oh, do you believe in the prophets? And they kind of went, yeah, I do. And it helped them put everything together for God.
Well, and I've heard multiple testimonies over the years I've been a part of this church from new families that come here. Maybe the parents will sit in the sermon and sit in the service or whatever, and then they'll ask their kids, how was class downstairs? How to go in kids ministry? Obviously, they can be scared, they can be nervous, whatever. And a lot of parents will be taken aback when their kids can recall what they learned about Jesus. And you don't often get that out there. Oh, we had goldfish, and oh, we had this and that and the other, and those things do happen. But man, I have heard it straight from the mouths of babes. Parents saying like, my kid learned something about Jesus downstairs while I was upstairs, and sometimes that's what motivates families to be like, oh wow, this is serious stuff.
So let's look at that
Yeah.
that statement.
Verse 26.
27.
27.
You know, where Paul asks King Agrippa, "Do you believe the prophets?" And he says, "I know that you do." What did and the question is more rhetorical in a way. What did Paul know about Agrippa that would make him say that? Was that Holy Spirit, infused in terms of insight, or I know that you do? Now, was he assuming what was it about Agrippa? And going back to, Agrippa had come to visit, Agrippa and Bernice, whatever weird relation that was with his sister. They had gone to visit Festus, and Festus tells Agrippa, I've got this guy, blah, 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 and I have nothing definite about him to write to my Lord. I'm not sure what to say. It's absurd to send him, to Caesar and for that. And Agrippa said to, let's see, where is it? In verse 22, then Agrippa said to Festus, I'd like to hear the man myself. So I look at that, and that's an interesting. Now, was he just curious? Had he heard about Paul? There's something that says I think he had to have. I mean, if this man, Paul, had caused so much angst and anger in Jerusalem, the whole city, we knew from 22, 23, had been turned upside down over Paul. Agrippa had to have known, had to have heard this story. And he says, I'd like to hear this man myself. Was it just pure curiosity? Was there something maybe happening in his heart that intrigued him enough? And then Agrippa says to Paul that next to you are permitted to speak for yourself. I mean, he gives Paul kind of carte blanche. I mean, it's you got the floor, buddy. Let's
hear it.
Let's hear it. I mean,
and I wondered about that, and this is just my historical curiosity. Maybe you know the answer, Mark, and maybe you don't. Like, is there some? I know a lot of our government systems and court systems and things are based on that of the Greeks and the Romans. So is this highly unusual? You know how in our judicial system, if you don't have an attorney, one will be appointed for you, or you can choose to stand on your own. Do you know if that's like an unusual thing for them to give him carte blanche without his lawyer being involved, or like
I don't know.
Historically,
I don't know, and I don't
lawyer-wise.
And I think, to me, my understanding was this was kind of a spur of the moment. Festus, it was unique because Festus just didn't know what to do. He said, I inherited this guy. He's innocent, to best I know. And so he convenes this to help him figure out, if he's going to Rome, we got to come up with something here. So at least we know that within that Roman system, there was this idea of a man needs to be given his just due. And so Festus is doing that here. But in this setting, this was very unique. It was the man was unique. That there was no charges. That for 2 years he'd been there. Felix is gone. Festus is here. He doesn't know what to do with this guy, and so the whole setting is very unique. But when when Agrippa comes, there's something again about that whole story. And I guess one of the applications is, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? Paul just, after being accused of being a bandman by Festus, he turns to Agrippa. And I think there's such a sensitivity and an awareness with Paul about there's something going on there that the text leaves us, it's a mystery. We don't have the eye contact. We don't know what's going on. What we do know is that Agrippa wanted to hear him. That was sincere. And he gives Paul the floor. And then Paul, after giving all this, and he's a Jew, so he's got that background, and he knows these things. He says, I know that you do believe this, what the prophets say. And so here's the application. Paul, even under, and this was not brought out in the sermon. So this is, I already went over time. But
I know.
Here's an application. I think Paul was so aware and sensitive of his audience. Mm-hmm. It wasn't about himself. Every moment, almost, I think, of his life. Now, I know he got discouraged. We know that, and depressed, and almost despaired of life, he says in 2 Corinthians. But I think Paul was so aware of what his role was, of proclaiming, and so aware of his audience. He was reading the eyes, he was reading the vibes of Agrippa. And he says, I know that you, it was in that moment, there was maybe, who knows, hundreds of people there, but in that moment, it was Paul and Agrippa. Mm-hmm. And they locked on, and he says, I know that you know. And the only response that Agrippa gave was, in such a short time, you're almost persuading me to become a Christian. Now, some people interpret that it might have been a question. Are you trying to persuade me to be a Christian in such a short time? And I don't think that was it at all. And I think it was a genuine statement by Agrippa. And why do I say that? Because the context says Agrippa wanted to hear Paul, mm-hmm. and he gave him the floor. I think there was something real that was going on there. So the takeaway there in terms of application is when we're engaging people, we need to pray that God will give us a sensitivity to the people we're talking to speak when we should speak, to be quiet when we should be quiet, but just give us a sensitivity of what the Holy Spirit might be doing, because that Holy Spirit that could be drawing that Agrippa is working in Paul's heart,
right? And
there's got to be something going on in his spirit, in Paul's spirit, that gave him that permission to ask that pointed question. It leaves us there. We don't know beyond that. Another thing to play into this thing, and this is all conjecture, but I did share historically there was a lot of rumor mill going on between Agrippa and his sister Bernice, and I don't know if you have ever been accused of something that you were absolutely innocent of, but it's something goes on in the rumor mill, and you can't. Well, maybe that was going on with Agrippa. Maybe they were totally innocent. His sister Bernice had been married to a guy who died. Then it was a forced marriage to somebody else, I believe, and that failed. And she ends up going back to maybe a safe place, to a brother, to home, maybe accused improperly. We don't know. There's all this stuff that goes on in the life of a person. Mm-hmm. They're bringing all that pain, maybe all that baggage. Maybe it was illicit. And he's guilt-ridden because he's Jewish.
Well, and how unusual I think it's unusual for Luke to put her name in there. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Because, everybody would know it.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So there's something there
yes,
that we might
it was a big story.
Understand.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, again, it's conjecture. It's fun to kind of think what the potential was. But what we do know is that Paul had something as he locked eyes with Agrippa. And we need to be as sensitive to the people we are engaging in and open to the direction of the Holy Spirit as we confront and talk with people.
Mm-hmm. And I think, too, it goes back to, we had a side conversation this morning on Tuesday mornings, which is the day today is Tuesday. And on Tuesday mornings, we have our worship planning team. And we had a side conversation this morning in that meeting about, again, our stories And, you know, we've been showing people in our congregation and their stories and how God has prepared them for such a time as this, you know. And when we talk about things like, Mark, you told the funny description of what Paul looked like, you know. So here's this kind of funny looking guy, and I can almost picture, you know, the kids maybe make fun of him because he's so funny looking, and there's nothing about him that might, you know, like sometimes we like think about politicians, you know, the guy who's the best dressed, or, you know, those kinds of things, the one who's most visually appealing to us, that's who we tend towards. And Paul, there was nothing in that Paul, right? And yet God still uses him in such a powerful way. And I feel like that just says something about his training as a person, his experiences in his life, his ability to stand up and have that kind of courage, how God has used his past to bring him to this kind of climactic moment. And it's really kind of fun to see from our perspective.
And
you
just
know?
the power of the risen Christ that was flowing through him.
Yes.
If I be lifted up, I will draw men to myself. And there was something about Paul that he receded into the shadows.
Yes.
In spite of his education and his command of the presence, as we see all these things about him, you know, his Greek influence, his Roman citizenship, his Jewish heritage, all of those things that combined to be able to, after 2 years of being in prison, to stand in front of that austere group and be able to, my goodness, hold his own. And you know, the idea of he was not the prisoner; they were the prisoners, captured by him. It speaks to the creativity of God to use a small, bald-headed, crooked-legged, hook-nosed guy.
Well, it's cool that people would know what Paul's been through, and I think he might earn some credibility based on his experiences, but it's awesome to know, in Paul's mind, his resume isn't changing. He's just talking about Christ. It's Christ in me, right? He writes to Galatia, I climbed in the Jewish ranks.
Yeah.
Like when I talk about what all the things I did, of all people, I like to talk about this anytime I'm teaching a passage from Paul, of all people, to actually be able to say, do you have any idea what I've done and what I'm capable of doing? You ought to listen to me. I could read it and be like, yeah, he's right. But it's only about Christ. And look at how he responds to that question. Verse 28, or verse 29, Paul replied, short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am. Man, if I had somebody that asked me, do you think that you could persuade me to be a Christian? Paul could go, yep. Like, I feel like that's a possible temptation
exactly.
there.
Right.
In that environment, oh my, you could so easily puff yourself up with your message and say, I got you right where I want you. Paul could have said, he never does in Acts, you know, if God wills. That's what he says.
Yeah.
Of all opportunities for one of us to be like, yes, I can do that to you. No, that's not.
Yeah.
Paul's never wanted to arrive at that yes, I'm going to convert you. He's saying, hey, if it's a short time from now or forever from now, I'm going to pray to God that everybody would.
Or look at verse
That's
22.
convicting.
Look at verse 22. So in 21, for this reason, some Jews seized me in the temple and tried to put me to death. And then in verse 22, he says, so having obtained help from God, I stand this day. Not I stand this day because... you know,
because I talked my way out of it.
Yeah, or any of those kinds of things. Yeah, or because I appealed to Rome or whatever, or I made this decision. He says, having obtained help from God.
Yeah.
So even in those things, he gives the honor and glory and really the correct place to God.
And all of that comes back to his central theme being Christ suffered and he rose again. He is alive. I'm on trial today, not because of a dead man. I'm on trial today because he rose again. And I'm proclaiming that. So again, it goes back to those three applications I gave, but you know, the aliveness of God and one plus God is a distinct majority. And when you have Jesus, you have everything. Paul was so enamored by that. He was so caught with that. It defined everything that he did and said, I think, for the most part. And he wanted to pass it on. He relished the thought of passing it on and sharing it, whether it was great or the small, he said it, the small or the great. He was compelled to do it. What he said in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 5:10, woe am I if I do not share the gospel. I mean, if I do not
The
proclaim
finished
this-
work of Christ motivated him to work. We don't often think that way. We want to focus on our own works. We want to figure out our stuff and what we got to do, or this, that, and the other. But man, to understand, it came up in our pastors meeting earlier, just talking about missions, partnering, and how can we teach the finished work of Christ so we understand what we're living from.
Yeah.
And not what we're striving towards, as
Yeah.
if God's teasing us with a carrot on a stick sort of thing. Like,
Yeah.
do you have any idea what Jesus did? And I tell our students this all the time. Do you have any idea where he is now and what he's up to?
That's so good.
Like, how often have you pictured where Jesus Christ is right now? You ask children that. You ask teenagers that. They don't kind of get that question a lot, so they're like, well, God's always with me. Absolutely he is. Do you know where Jesus Christ is right now? And you get the right hand of the Father God and this Holy Spirit on behalf of you with groanings too loud for words, prayer, and like you can see it come over their eyes of this reality of this isn't just a story.
Yeah.
Like he is actually alive and he's actually working.
Yeah.
You know, I listened to a few minutes before walking in here because I wanted to have the context. I did listen to the Double Take podcast that you mentioned,
yeah.
Mark, and to hear her talk about her having a dream. She's in this prison going through this horrible, horrible, horrible things. She has a dream, and in her dream, she sees Christ's wounds in her hand, and her reaction to that is, oh, thank you that I can suffer. Just you let me see just a little bit of your suffering on my behalf, you know. And I'm just like blown away by that kind of like awareness of what Christ did for us and how we can move and walk in that.
Yeah.
You know,
The concern always, as believers, is that if we're not reminded of that often, we can get caught up involved, and we can all of a sudden drift. You know, like the Hebrews, the writer of the Hebrews says, you know, we can be so easily
There's no
led
plateau.
astray.
There's no plateau in the Christian faith.
Yeah,
You're
right.
growing closer to him or drifting away.
That's right. And I think,
that's a great. I really like that. I appreciate that.
and it wouldn't have been fun. We don't know, but the 2 years that Paul is in prison there in Caesarea, what was going on? Now he probably had access to Luke and Aristarchus and these friends that there was probably fellowship. You have to believe that. But when 2 years later, and as far as we know, he sat in that prison after Felix left. He sat there for 2 years until Festus came, and I mean, there was nothing. He's just lost to humanity. But man, something was going on, because when he gets out, the guy is on his game, and he was fellowshipping with Jesus during those 2 years. He was in tune.
Ended
with
up
the
better
Lord.
for him. Yeah.
Yes, and I think again, if there's anything we can learn from the passage, it's the value of continuing in fellowship with the Lord, and His aliveness, and not being, yes. There's a lot in this world to be concerned about. There's a lot of terrible stuff, there was the big pride thing that happened in Winchester Saturday, and the, 2 drag shows, one at 1 and one at 3 at the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley, and all sorts of stuff that the darkness is encroaching on us in every which way imaginable. Doesn't mean we push the panic button. It means we have an offer of eternal life, of a living Savior to offer this world, and to do it with boldness and calmness, and not push the panic button, and not put our hope in any other thing other than a resurrected Jesus. And again, I think that came out in spades. And Paul.
Do we want to protect our kids? Do we want to protect our
Yeah.
families from those lies? Yes. But
And
do we want to
confront
take
those.
our church families down into our spiritual bomb shelter to wait it out?
I'd like to sometimes.
We want to, but that's not the Great Commission.
No.
We need to figure out how to be in the world, not of the world. That's a biblical concept. We cannot defend ourselves against a culture we know nothing about. How do we understand the mission field so that we can leave God's impact on it instead of the other way around?
Which is what Paul is in a sense doing. As I was thinking about your third application, Mark, and Jesus is everything. I was thinking about kind of the contrast of this, hook-nosed, bald guy, and the power of Rome and what Rome was. And, maybe some people have been to Italy, or you see pictures we saw pictures in the video you showed on Sunday of Italy, and you go to that Colosseum.
Caesarea.
Oh, Caesarea.
That was
sorry.
Caesarea. Yeah.
But you go and you see like this magnificence that must have been Rome, right? And the Roman Empire. And all the power and wealth, and they loved virtue, the idea of virtue and rhetoric, and education was important to them, and all these concepts. And then you have Paul standing there saying, "But I have been blessed with every spiritual blessing," and here he is contrasted to that. And I think that that's kind of that can become true for us as Christians. We need to remember that the things of this world, the power, the virtue, the microphone, we'll say, the ability to influence the culture by what we say, sometimes those things feel like those are things we're after, as opposed to remembering we have spiritual blessings and we have the power of the Holy Spirit in us.
And an eternal mindset as well. I mean, we look at our lives, every single second we've been awake on this earth, we've been in line for the roller coaster. That's it. That's the whole thing. Are we gonna complain about the person in front or behind us in the line? Are we gonna complain that the line's not moving fast enough? Or are we aware of what we're about to experience and who we can experience it with, so that we start to see this? I don't know if you've ever been in a roller coaster line before, but when you're aware of what you're about to be on, it's a 2-hour wait, but it's worth it. You know what I'm saying? If you understand where you're headed, you can kind of tackle it better.
I get upset with a 30-second wait at a red light.
Right, right. Well, and in this culture of instant gratification, we get defeated twice as quickly now. Yeah. And so how can we understand the character of God, the attributes of God, and how he speaks and how he moves? Because it's going to be slower than this world. It's going to be more subtle, but it's going to give birth to this kind of confidence that no matter the context.
What would we do different this week, or what would we have done different last week if we were locked in on this idea of the aliveness of God, which we believe, right? We know it, but
we know it. We know many things, but sometimes we
head knowledge, heart knowledge,
don't live it.
Yeah. We just, which is the value of small groups. It's a value of doing what we're doing here, getting on a podcast, sharing these things. These are little opportunities to be reminded of that. The other thing, going back to the other passage you referred to, is so what we've just been talking about in a way is how we can orient our life around this truth. But going back to the chapter 26, verse 18 passage, Paul was commissioned. I mean, there was a commissioning. I'm sending you, Jesus said, and this is it's unique to Paul, but it was, in a sense, it wasn't. I mean, he sent to the Gentile or the disciples to the world. Go into the world, and we're called to that as well. To what? Open their eyes, so that they may turn from darkness to light, from the dominion of Satan to God. We going back to what we're not called to hide away in the basement. So there is, if we are convinced of the aliveness of God, if we are convinced that a distinct majority is me plus God, if we're convinced that we have Jesus and we've got everything and we want them to have everything too, then there is something that should call us to go into the world like this, and not with anger, not with judgmentalness, not with whatever, but with this sense of the love of Jesus, and be used by God.
And understanding that that's what he died for.
Right. To be used by Jesus to open their eyes. God is the one who does that, that they may turn from darkness to light. That's what this world is darkness. That's what the world is, dominion of Satan. Paul said he transferred me out of the domain of Satan into the kingdom of his beloved Son, so that they may then receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who have been set apart, sanctified through faith in me. So there's a lot to unpack there, but there's such hope in these verses to offer a world that is in darkness and in the domain of Satan. Forgiveness of sins and the idea of inheritance, it can be talked about.
The idea of inheritance to me conveyed the idea of hope. So as I was looking through this passage, I was like, so you can share with them the hope that they can have, because this world, this dark domain of Satan feels so hopeless.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
Well, and it is.
That's what it was supposed to demonstrate.
Right. Yeah. He said, Peter wrote it this way: "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his great mercy," as 1 Peter 1, "has caused us to be born again to a living hope." Seems like we just sung that. A living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance which is imperishable and undefiled and will not fade away, which is reserved in heaven for you, who are protected by the power of God, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, let's not hang our heads. Let's not retreat into the shadows. Let's, with a certain boldness, but as Peter would say it, and I use that verse in 1 Peter 3:15 to give it that defense for the hope when people ask us, but with reverence and gentleness.
Yeah, which I just, I know that I'm more vested than some people are, and I study over it sometimes more than others do, but that was the benediction of the service the week before. I don't know how many of you realize that, but that verse that you just referred to,
Right,
we had used
right.
it as a benediction in the service the week before. So it just says again to me that like God has this message for us as a church, Fellowship Bible Church right now, and for his people, and it has to do with like his faithfulness over time and giving a defense. And so you kind of go, what is God preparing us for here in Winchester as a church and as a people?
Right.
And having a sensitive spirit to that, and hearing these passages that keep coming to the forefront in different settings inside our church, as like kind of a spiritual, what would the word be, like nourishment for our souls right now because of what God is preparing us for.
Yeah, and built on what you just said is one reason why we provided a tool for people to use, the little thing with that the spiral brown, printed on the front of it, a tool that says, part of that tool is to get us to reflect on how has God prepared us. What is that journey? Where do we see God and his faithfulness show up? Because that's preparatory. Right. I mean, we're here today. We're not in the past. We're living today. We don't know what tomorrow holds. But looking back at the past, there is something that we can reflect on and worship God for and celebrate and build upon that says, what has he prepared me for yet to come? Paul did that in his testimony. That was another thing I would have loved to have developed more, but that 3-part of his testimony. Before I trusted Christ, we do that in our baptism classes. Before I try to give a 3-minute testimony, minute 1. Before I trusted Christ, minute 2, how I met Christ. 3rd minute of your testimony, what's life been like since I trusted Christ?
Right, and I think that, like, remembering that we keep, before I met Christ and now, right? That kind of 3 pieces, Mark, that you have so instilled, at least in my walk, and I'm assuming in the walk of others inside our congregation, made me circle, like, chapter 26, verse 6. I circled the word "and now," because to me that just contained in the words "and now" is that moment of transition for before Christ I was this and did this, and now this is what I am and have done. And then that, of course, led me to that verse that I mentioned right away, which is verse 18, which is, and now I have these things, right? So I really appreciated seeing that and now moment in this story as well, and knowing that I have an and now moment. Before Christ I was this, and now.
And hopefully we can do
That's
that.
good.
Hopefully we can do that more often and as often as possible. That tool is a one-stop shop exercise to do that. But the next time there's a low or there's an event in our life, we can go ahead and think, okay, I've had one of these before.
That's right.
And so I don't know. One day this will be on a graph where I'm demonstrating my faithfulness to somebody else. If we could start to think that way, and it's hard, but if we could understand that that's actually what faith is, now we start to see it all take shape. That's why other people's testimonies are encouraging too.
That's right.
Your discipleship of me and hearing like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, you went through that. He had that life experience and learned that. It's the same God.
Yeah. This is not the tool. What you just said. It's not to be separated from the community, from body life. We talked about this today too. Was the value of doing, say, that little tool together. If you're in a community group, in a small group, man, do that thing together. You're kicking off small groups now, maybe at this new ministry year in September. What a great thing to do for the first week or two is to use that thing, chart your life a little bit, and then each buddy in the community group take 5 minutes and point to those high points or where God showed up, because it encourages the other people. It reminds you, and it stimulates, I think, for greater faith.
Yeah, and I think it also shows that the God of this word, the God of the story of Daniel in the lion's den, the God of Paul standing before Felix and Agrippa and Paul's journey to Rome, like, it shows you that God is the same God who lives today.
Who's working in Ayler Middle School right now.
Yeah, and so when Jennifer and Michael Wiseman, we hear them say that Michael is praying for a wife at the same time that Jennifer's getting sent to Fort Hood.
Right.
That encourages us that this same God is working in their lives. Or when we hear this morning, again, at that Double Take podcast, I'll refer to that again. When I hear her talk about her having a prayer in prison that someone is going to be released in 6 weeks, and just like Joseph, right? He interprets their dreams. One is going to be released and isn't. The same God is still working in prisons around the world. And that encourages my faith and encourages my heart and reminds me that this is God's word and his truth,
Yeah. One final thought, and again, I didn't talk about this, but the very last verse of chapter 26, when it was all said and done, Agrippa said to Festus, this man might have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. Where there's no fault in him, well, guess what? That wasn't part of God's plan. It was God's plan for him to go as a prisoner to Rome, to be shackled to the Praetorian Guard, to lead many people to Christ. Paul will be released at some point. There's a few years yet before he is. But, we would all think, oh, of course that would have been best. Paul, why did you appeal? Because that was all part of God's plan to get him to Rome. And
That's awesome.
I just, love that.
Right. And again, I mean, that Double Take podcast is so great. It was all part of God's plan that those girls be in prison for 9 months so that they could minister and persuade other people to love and now tell their story.
And they could have lost their lives. They were condemned to be hanged. And many were. But yeah, so, well, this is offline, but Mike Lukens just went to the Sing conference, which is the Getty's worship conference last week. And one of those gals,
not Marissa.
No, Marianne, not Marianne, but Marzia spoke
yes.
at the Getty worship conference just last week. So that was kind of an interesting
cool
timing. So, yeah.
Anyway. It's awesome. Mark, thank you for being here, man. Appreciate it. Rose, you're awesome. I love your notes and your thoughts. As a reminder to our viewers and listeners, you can find us all over the place on your favorite podcast platform. Type in Sermon Spotlight. We pop right up. All this information and more you can find at fbcva.org. The fact of the matter, everybody, is that sermons are not meant to just take an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. Until next week, much love. God bless.